Sayın Cumhurbaşkanı'nın salona teşriflerini arz ederim. Mr. President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan.
Distinguished members of the press, respectable ladies and gentlemen, I would like to salute you all with my most heartfelt emotions and with respect. We have just concluded the Vilnius Summit program with the session of the NATO-Ukraine Council. We have once again observed a successful completion of another critical summit in the 74-year history of our alliance. And in the success of our summit, of course, right next to other factors, the hospitality of our host became quite significant. That's why I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the Lithuanian authorities, primarily my dear friend, President Nausėdas. And at the same time, I would like to thank Secretary General Stoltenberg and his team on behalf of my personal self and on behalf of my delegation. And I also would like to take this opportunity to extend my gratitude for the solidarity that they have shown in the aftermath of the earthquake that shook Turkey on the eve of February the 6th. We have always been remembering our fond friends who have been in full solidarity with us. We have left behind 504 days in the war between Russia and Ukraine. And so long as the conflict is extended, blood and tears continue to grow. Only the parties that are in conflict are not paying the bill of this incredible battle, but also there are ramifications upon Europe, Africa, Asia, and Balkans. Many countries in different geographies are impacted. The food scarcity that our African brothers and sisters are suffering from, the inflation rates which are skyrocketing in an unprecedented fashion in the last 5 decades, and the incredible increases in the energy prices are some of the ramifications that I wanted to underline. As Turkey, while we are in lockstep with our allies within NATO, we are also investing tremendous efforts in order to make sure that this battle will come to an end. Since the first day, we have been very meticulously implementing the relevant provisions of the Montreux Convention on Turkish Straits. We haven't allowed the battleships to cross Turkish Straits, and thus we have stopped this conflict from pouring over to other regions. The contact between different parties was initiated with the Istanbul process, and it was preceded with the Black Sea Initiative and the exchange of the prisoners of war that led to the release of the Ukrainian grain from the ports. As a result of our deliberations, the grain agreement was extended twice, and within the framework of this agreement, until so far, 33 million tons of grains were exported to the global markets. But unfortunately, the existing mechanism will expire on July the 17th. The Black Sea Initiative became a source of hope for hundreds of millions of citizens around the world, and our contacts are still going on in order to extend this initiative once again. The Ukrainian President, Mr. Zelensky, paid an official visit to my country last Friday, and we have also talked about this issue along with other important issues with him. Mr. Zelensky is defending the extension of this initiative, and Mr. Putin came up with certain suggestions. And all of these suggestions will be taken into consideration, and we will keep on working in a solution-oriented fashion. Our close dialogue with both of our neighbors enable us to extend this initiative and settle the disputes and the crises between parties once and for all. That's what we will continue to do. As we have always stated, there are no triumphants of war, and there are never losers behind peace. We want the seeds of peace in our region to flourish once again. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, within the first session of the summit, we talked about issues concerning the defense of our allies. We have reiterated the fact that Turkey is still very much invested in the allied defense pledges, and that we have always served our responsibilities in the best fashion possible. Of course, solidarity is not a concern for us all, but it is an issue that has to be internalized by all of our allies. The spirit of solidarity has to be our guiding light. This is the main fundamental pillar upon which the alliance is erected. Some of our allies especially invested in crooked relations with PYD and YPG, which are offsprings or extensions of the terrorist organization PKK in Syria, and this is harming the unity and the integrity of alliance. This approach can never be explained through logic and through rationale. Despite the pain that we have been suffering for many decades, it is thought-provoking that we are still discussing, debating about these issues for what they are when it comes to fighting terrorism sincerely. I think it's a shame that we are still launching an appeal to our allies not to make a discrimination between terrorist organizations and to keep on fighting Islamophobia and animosity against Islam. NATO appears to understand terrorism or fighting terrorism as one of the two fundamental threats imposed upon us. That's why NATO has to increase its efforts in fighting terrorism. We have been fighting a terrorist organization for the last 4 decades, and thousands of our citizens were lost in our fight against terrorism and as a result of their bloody attacks. The newborn babies, the teachers who were embracing their students after 4 years of education, and the laborers who were trying to make a living. And from children to women, hundreds and thousands of innocent citizens were snatched away from us heinously. Only 3 days ago, 2 heroic soldiers were heinously martyred by the terrorists. This is our red line. We have to fight terrorism without any ifs, without any buts, and in an unwavering fashion. And we want a resolute and a very clear stance from all of our allies against terrorism. And I have communicated these messages very frankly to all of my counterparts and my colleagues. For the first time in the history of NATO, special coordinator to fight terrorism will be appointed by Secretary General himself. The guiding principles, which have not been updated in the last decade, will have to be revised as soon as possible, and this decision was gladly made. And there are so many other issues that we had discussed amongst ourselves and upon which we had all seemed to have agreed. And these are steps to be taken forward which will establish and confirm the strong stance of our alliance against terrorism. Of course, the tremendous efforts Turkey has paid had a great ramification upon the taking of these decisions. Within the second session of the summit, we got together with our Asia-Pacific partners, which are Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea. Heads of states and governments were joined. And we discussed issues with these leaders as to how we may further cooperate and how we may strengthen the relations between them and that NATO. We also talked about the recent developments in the region. These are the days where the global security risks are on the rise. And it's very natural to further cooperate in a very extensive fashion through the enrichment of political dialogue through NATO with these countries, both at the bilateral level and multilateral level. These relations will have to be strengthened without targeting any third country whatsoever, and this is something I had specifically mentioned. And in the last session of the summit, NATO-Ukraine Council was organized. And in this new format, we had brought the relations between NATO and Ukraine to a new political level, and a higher level for that matter. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Turkey has always been very supportive of the open door policy of NATO. We had never arbitrarily prevented any country becoming a full-fledged member of the alliance. Looking at the history of our alliance, just because of its name, some countries had to linger on and on without a membership for more than 16 years. And similarly, during our accession negotiations to the European Union, we have been suffering from double standards that went on for more than 5 decades. Although we had encountered unlawfulness and injustice, we were very fair towards other interlocutors and stakeholders. We never gave promises that we couldn't keep, nor did we ever ignore the promises that were made to us. The membership of Finland once again confirmed the internalized nature of the spirit of alliance, which fully respects the fundamental principles of NATO. And that's how we had showcased once again to what extent we are very supportive of the enlargement of the alliance in a principled fashion. During the summit sessions and during our bilateral discussions, we also focused on the agenda item of Swedish accession to NATO. You know that right before the summit was initiated, we got together with the Secretary General and the Prime Minister of Sweden in a trilateral format. In this meeting, we openly discussed the expectations of our country. We also focused on the principles registered within the trilateral memorandum, and we also elaborated upon the current situation of Sweden in terms of fulfilling its pledges. And with the joint declaration, we also identified the steps that we are going to take in the future for the full membership of Sweden to NATO, according to which the Trilateral Permanent Joint Committee will be very operational. We are also going to increase our cooperation fighting terrorism as a result of the bilateral security mechanism that was established at the level of ministers. Sweden is going to present a roadmap that will encompass matters in fighting terrorism and all of the other recorded issues revolving around the trilateral memorandum. And Sweden will be actively supporting our accession negotiations to the EU and the updating of the customs union, which is vital and critical for our economy, all the way down to the prospective visa liberalization as a member of the platform. And in terms of the elimination of the export restrictions, Sweden will rise up to the occasion and honor its responsibilities with regards to the restrictions imposed upon Turkey. And as a result of our further assessments, we are going to move on to the next step of Swedish accession to the NATO. The heinous attacks against our holy book of Quran was not approved by the Swedish government authorities, and we had made a note of their stance. We expect them not to further tolerate the hate crimes that humiliate and anger more than 2 billion Muslims around the world. Today, the Human Rights Council in Geneva labeled the burning of the Quran as a religious hate crime. And it was condemned by this council, and which made us very happy. There are those countries inside this council which have rejected this identification, and I would kindly recommend those countries to revisit their stance against attacking a religious and a holy book of a faith. This is barbaric. This is very primitive. It's a form of terrorist attack to fight the holy elements of a religion. It's not only for Turkey, but also for other countries to take resolute measures to fight Islamophobia. And our expectations were clearly stated to our interlocutors during our sessions. Of course, the accession protocols of Sweden to NATO is the Turkish Grand National Assembly, which is the representative of the national free will. And our members of the parliaments will be closely monitoring the developments and this process. We believe that we are going to observe concrete advances on the principles that were previously agreed upon by Sweden in the meanwhile. And I would like to underline one more fact. Inside our borders or outside borders, all of the impacts imposed upon the terrorist organization from a political, from a military, diplomatic, or lawful point of view is going to be a great gain for our country, and it's going to be a meaningful reward for us. Turkey is very sensitive about this, and praising terrorism, praising terrorist organizations, and not fighting terrorist organizations is unacceptable. And it's going to be very difficult for these terrorist organizations to roam freely on the streets of European countries after this commitment, the collective commitment of our friends. The sensitivities of Turkey showcase clearly that the PKK threat is becoming more of a malignant tumor in the European communities. And I believe the experiences of Sweden will become exemplary for the other countries. One of the most important outputs of NATO, right next to the increasing of the deterrence factor of NATO, is the commitment to fight against terrorism and to support us in the eventual European Union membership of our country, and the elimination of the export restrictions upon Turkey. And I believe this platform is going to be instrumental in the making up of new decisions. We hope and pray that with the leaps forward, we are going to strengthen this platform more and more, and we will be rewarded more. As all of the parties, we will keep on defending the interests of our country in every platform in a very resolute and a committed fashion, and we will protect the rights of our citizens. We are going to increase the role and the weight of Turkey and the efficiency of Turkey in every aspect possible in the future. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, within the margin of the summit, I've had the opportunity and the privilege to get together with many heads of states and governments. On Monday, we got together with Secretary General and the Swedish Prime Minister within the framework of the trilateral mechanism. We also got together with Mr. Michel of the EU Council. We got together with President of France, Mr. Macron. We got together with the British Prime Minister, Mr. Sunak, Prime Minister of Canada, Mr. Trudeau, Madame Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, Chancellor Scholz of Germany, and Mr. Joe Biden, the President of the United States of America. We got together with Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain, which is the term president of the EU at the time. We got together with the Dutch Prime Minister, Mr. Rutte, the Prime Minister of Greece, Mitsotakis, Mr. Edi Rama of Albania. We got together with von der Leyen from the EU Commission. And we've also had very effective bilateral discussions and deliberations with all of my dear friends and colleagues. We also had pull-aside meetings with many leaders from around the world. We talked about our bilateral relations, and we also focused on our cooperation within the framework of NATO with these leaders. While I'm concluding my remarks, I would like to once again thank the Lithuanian President, Mr. Nausėda, and the Secretary General of NATO, Mr. Stoltenberg, for being such gracious and successful hosts for the summit. I'm thanking them on behalf of myself and on behalf of my nation. I hope and pray that the Vilnius summit results will be the most auspicious, and I would like to salute you all with love and respect once again. Thank you.
Mikrofonlar yok mu çocuklar? Hadi verin. So where are the mobile microphones? Greetings, President. I'm a journalist from Azerbaijan. My name is Hayal Azizov. As we know, in Dağlık Karabakh, the conflict still continues. And the Russian army is in Karabakh. And both Azerbaijan and Armenian are disturbed because of this. Last week, in Karabakh, they displayed disrespect towards the Azerbaijani flag. The Russian soldiers took down the Azerbaijani flag, and there is a video of that available. Now, the Russian soldiers being present there in Karabakh. Now, Russians want to stay there. How does Turkey approach this, and what's your thought on this? I mean, the Russian soldiers being present in Karabakh. Do you think they should continue to be there? Because, you know, after 2 years, if one of the parties say the Russian soldiers should leave, normally they should leave. What's your thought on this? Dear friends, now, the thing is, as you know, rather than, I mean, more than our approach to this, the thing is as follows. There's an agreement there. Up to 2025, according to the agreement, Russia should be present in those identified places. Come the year 2025, Russia will and would leave. That's what the agreement says. And I believe that Russia will abide by this agreement. And my dear brother Ilham Aliyev, in fact, has been following this up closely anyway. Thank you.
Here, speculation that perhaps during a future negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, you could be the negotiator. And I was wondering if you are considering taking such a role if conditions allow. Thank you.
Now, if the parties propose, I mean, if they approach us and propose us to be the mediator, and if they accept that, of course, we would be glad to act as a mediator between the two countries. And as Turkey, we are already ready, potentially, for that. Anyway, because as you know, there's the grain corridor. Istanbul has now become a center, as you know, when it comes to the grain corridor. So like that, in other potential future steps, we're always ready to act as a mediator anytime if it comes to the table. Because in fact, currently, we are, as Turkey, I mean, myself, actually, I'm probably one of the rarest leaders who can talk to both countries. But up to now, we haven't received any proposals to that end.
Mr. President, as the President surely understands, Sweden is wondering about timetable for the ratification of the Swedish NATO membership. When, what day, or month, week will it happen? Some colleagues in your country are talking about October month. Is that true? And what still remains before you're going to have a vote of a Swedish membership in the parliament? Are we talking about something else, other new requirements? You have talked about the roadmap against terrorism. What was that? Thank you.
Yeah, dear friends, currently there is already a roadmap that exists. And now the Swedish authorities, in line with what we discussed last Monday, they will now submit us this roadmap. And following that, we will take that roadmap up and we will submit it to our parliament. Because Monday evening we came up with a draft, and that draft includes 7 articles, 7 bullet points, and we will send it to our parliament. Currently, the Turkish parliament is not in session. Once the parliament reopens for sessions, I believe the Speaker of our Parliament will, of course, put this on top of, as one of the top priorities on his agenda. Of course, it's the Turkish Parliament who is the #1 authority of ratification. After that, it will come to me for approval. And we will make sure, of course, that we will closely follow this up. Of course, we would like to see this process be completed as soon as possible. Ben Ukrayna'dan bağımsız bir haber.
Thank you so much for the fact that the Azov commanders who were in Turkey are back to Ukraine. Can you please comment on the detailed process of their return home to Ukraine? Thank you so much.
Well, you, I'm sure, know it better than I do. From now on, it's up to President Zelensky. They received these commanders already and they took them back to Ukraine. And the rest is up to them. So one from each, rotatingly from each side of the room. Before your trip here in the airport, you talked about membership to the EU. And you made a declaration. How was that taken during your bilateral discussions with leaders? Can we say that there is now a step up of and going into a new process in terms of your country's membership to the EU? And how about the customs union upgrade? We did discuss this with all the leaders. Both visa liberalization and updating of the customs union was discussed. Lately, we discussed this with Ms. von der Leyen as well, and we expect to see a welcoming approach from them. And currently, Mr. Çağatay, my relevant embassy, is following this up, and I hope during the discussions to take place in Brussels tomorrow, this will be taken up again. Nurgül Dönmez from TRT News. During the summit, you had many bilateral meetings. Yesterday, you met with Joe Biden of the US, and the meeting took more than an hour. How about the content of that meeting with President Biden? And we're also curious about F-16s. Can we expect to see a step in the coming days? Now, with the meeting with the president, the American president, what he said was the following. The Congress in the US, he said, is binding for them. And he stated that he will personally do everything he can and that he would follow this up. And he also said he's hopeful. I mean, just like in our case, like in the case of the Turkish parliament having to ratify, like in the previous matter we discussed. Likewise, in the US, there's a similar situation. Sometimes there are obstacles introduced either by Democrats or by Republicans, depending on. But both the President and the Secretary of State in the US will follow this up. This is what we've been told. And we hope that as part of this process, we will be able to get a positive end result. I'm more hopeful than ever, by the way. All the way at the back, please. Microphone, please.
Mr. Erdogan, you give the Sweden approval to join NATO. Is it the beginning of Turkey to join the EU? Thank you so much.
Well, what a great thing to say. I would hope, like you are hoping, we would want to hope that that would be the case.
Popular Politics, Anna. Tell me, please, was the freedom for Ukrainian heroes of Azov is a sign for Putin of possibility of stop the relationships and cooperation?
Now, first of all, of course, this happened at the end of a discussion between Ukraine and Russia, initially. And then it came to our table. And up to the point until last Friday, we hosted these Azov commanders. And after that, we received this request, and actually, we thought we should come up with a positive approach to this whole matter. And what we did was we gave back these, surrendered these 6 Azov commanders. Of course, first, Russia made some statements, declarations. But later on, they found out about certain things, and eventually it turned into a positive pathway. Within August, I believe I'll have a face-to-face talk with President Putin. During that meeting, we will, of course, discuss these things again.
President Erdogan, I'm from the Swedish newspaper Dagens Nyheter. I wonder if you could say something more about the Swedish accession processes. What do you believe, would it be in October that the Turkish parliament can make this decision?
Now, currently, the parliament is in summer break for 2 months. We cannot reopen the parliament during these 2 months because there are many international conventions on the agenda and table of the parliament. There are many draft laws which need to be discussed by the parliament. So the parliament will need to come up with a prioritization of these agenda items for its deliberations. But of course, as far as possible, our target is to be able to do this as soon as possible.
Mr. President, Efi Koutsakosta from Euronews. I want to ask you regarding the F-16 follow-up. As you said, the process in the Congress is binding. But are you ready to accept the modernization and delivery of these F-16 fighter jets, even if the Congress insists on strict conditions, namely Turkey abstaining from future aggression against neighboring countries, like Greece or Cyprus? And a second question, if I may, when it comes to the EU, before you come to Vilnius, you mentioned the accession process of your country. What kind of reforms are you planning to do in order to revive these talks long stalled over concerns for democracy, rule of law and human rights? Thank you.
Now, underlying this question is the following. I see that you don't know Turkey that closely, to begin with. When it comes to democracy and rights and freedoms, Turkey doesn't have problems. Now, I mean, in which other country have you heard in the world where you have 90% of turnout in elections? It would be rare. But look at our most recent elections. We had 88% turnout. That's how I was elected most recently. And when it comes to rights and freedoms, we don't have any shortcomings at all. The terrorist organization, if you think about it, what they are doing is, unfortunately, they can do whatever they want, the way they wish. And of course, the state is supposed to do what it is supposed to do as a state vis-à-vis those. Now, about Greece and Cyprus. Though F-16s being bound, now, I had talks with Mitsotakis today. We don't have an intention of having enemies or acquiring enemies. Erdogan's target is not to increase enemies. Erdogan's target is always to increase friends. That's my ultimate goal, always. And this is what I have always done. This is what we have always done so far. And today's talks with Mitsotakis revolved around what more to do to enforce our friendship, what more to do and how to enhance our friendship. That's what the talk was mainly about today. And today's meetings with him was, in fact, as if a rebuilding of or relaying of a foundation for friendship between us. There is no such thing as using F-16s like that, and that has never happened up to now anyway. President, I'm from Anadolu Agency. In international media, Turkey's trilateral meeting is mentioned, and the international media says, one coverage says, when it comes to sanctions being removed and when it comes to counterterrorism, Turkey has got what it wanted to. What do you think about this? Well, this is great, of course, but what we want to see is actual implementation of what we wanted to get. Well, if we see the actual de facto implementation of those pledges, we would, of course, share those with the media, including the Turkish media. We would want to, of course, actually see the implementations. Because, as you know, today, for politicians particularly, everything is built on self-interest. So the more self-interest is acquired, the more successful politicians see themselves, let's face it. And that's how we take steps. I mean, to me, as far as I'm concerned, the more I can make things positive for my people, the more successful I see myself.
Media Network. Mr. President, it's a good opportunity for me to ask you a question which is related to your neighbors, not related to the summit here. Is Turkey going to resume the oil shipment from the Kurdistan region of Iraq? And until now, lots of us don't know what is the issue, where is the problem. It's Baghdad, it's Ankara, or they need to be negotiation once again. Thank you.
Now, when it comes to acquiring or procuring oil from Iraq, we don't have any problems. This is entirely something which is between the central authority. It's a problem between the central authority in Iraq and the Kurdish administration within Iraq. My teams are following this up. And the step we have taken is follows. The central administration, the central authority in Iraq and the Kurdish administration in Iraq, we're waiting for the two to solve their own problem internally first. We do favor the pipelines to be opened up because, as far as we're concerned, it would be a win-win for both parties. So, could we just slowly wrap up, if you don't mind? The blue, please.
I'm Natalia from the Catalan News Agency. I wanted to ask you about the meeting with the Spanish President, Pedro Sánchez. I wanted to know if you are satisfied with his promise to help you on the accession talks. And I also wanted to know if you have any expectations in terms of like a deadline or something to get concrete steps towards accession. Thanks.
Sanchez, benim tabii
Sanchez is a good friend of mine, and I really, really like him. And I don't want to get involved in the internal affairs of Spain, but I think in the next 2 weeks, as the elections will be held, I would like to wish him the best of luck and best of success. And in the defense industry, we have been enjoying a close cooperation. And with Spain, you are probably aware of the fact that we have built an aircraft carrier, and potentially we are going to build yet another one. And there will be certain joint steps with regards to the Airbuses. So the term presidency of Spain, thus that of Sanchez, I'm expecting support. And he has announced that he was going to be very supportive. And on behalf of my personal self, and in the presence of Sanchez, I would like to extend my greatest gratitude, love, and respect of my people to the Spanish people and the Spanish government. Thank you. Please excuse me, and good night and good evening. May you remain in health.